The age of steam ushered in an epoch of travel in the grand manner. From the great ships to the great trains, it had never been easier to travel so far, so fast, in such opulence. On the seas, legendary Atlantic liners set the standard. On rails, nothing surpassed the 20th Century Limited. Hello, I'm Michael Gross, and this is New York's Grand Central Terminal, the home port, if you will, for the 20th Century Limited's nightly dash to Chicago. I'm wearing a suit because, well, it's unthinkable to dress down for a train like the Century. You know, in all of human history, the age of civilized travel was a brief one, here and gone in just a few decades. Join me as we visit that moment in time. Join me as we visit the 20th century. America, 1902. There's never been a time and place quite like it. The nation was still young, an experiment in self-government that was turning the old world order on its head. In the previous generation alone, the U.S. had emerged as an industrial power, had settled a continent, and had begun to flex its muscles on the world stage. There was nothing, it seemed, that Americans couldn't do. We even had a young president, Theodore Roosevelt, who was the living embodiment of the nation's energy and confidence. Those are the times that gave birth to the 20th Century Limited. Could there have been any other name for such a fabulous train at the dawn of the American century? It would be the chariot of the elite, connecting the nation's two biggest cities quickly and luxuriously. It was the product and the reflection of an optimistic age. Heady times called for a master promoter, and the New York Central lines had one in George H. Daniels. His title of general passenger agent belied his true genius as one of the giants of early advertising. In 1893, he staged a publicity stunt with the Central's new train, the Empire State Express, claiming that it had become the first machine ever to reach a speed of 100 miles per hour, or 112.5 to be precise. For good measure, he even got the U.S. Post Office Department to celebrate the achievement on one of the nation's first commemorative stamps. But Daniels was just getting started. His greatest achievement would be the 20th Century Limited.
Again, he coined that name. And, you know, it was a combination. It was just the right time for this great train. First of all, it was the beginning of the century, June 15th, 1902, when the train was inaugurated. The railroad had just been upgraded. At that point, they were bannering 20 hours between New York and Chicago.
20th century schedule was based on getting the businessman from Chicago to New York within a certain period of time so business could be conducted. Both trains arrived at their end terminals in the morning, so a businessman could go and conduct business, have lunch, and then depart later that evening for home again.
By most accounts, it was Daniels, and Daniels alone, who conceived of a faster, more luxurious train than anything that had come before. It was a success from the start, often with so many passengers that they had to be accommodated on multiple trains or sections running one after another, all of them with identical 20th Century Limited equipment and appointments.
All the newest amenities, a staff of some 50 people populated each section of that train, and there were often 2 or 3 sections running in a given night, one behind each other. You had Pullman conductors and sleeping car attendants, you had buffet and lounge car operators, the dining car crew, the train crew, all intended to get people through safely. And the New York Central took pride in operating a safe, on-time operation. In its early days, passengers were paid $1 for each hour the train was late, and that was at a time when a ticket might have cost $12, $15 at the train's origin. So the company's pride was heavily invested in this, hence the billing the greatest train in the world.
Part of the extra service available on the 20th Century Limited was things like a barbershop. If you needed your hair cut, well, why not do it while you're riding the 20th Century rather than have to take time out of your day when you arrived at your destination? If you were a businessman, or even for personal use, if you wanted to dictate a letter, a secretary was available to take dictation for you. services like that were just every day on the 20th Century Limited.
If you showed up at the station and you were in Section 3 and you encountered a friend who was in Section 2, there was a concierge here that would juggle the ticketing around so you could ride with your friend in another section of the train. You could order theater tickets so that you could have tickets awaiting you when you arrived in Chicago or New York to take in entertainment.
The Central even provided stock quotes to the passengers, and it took some doing. Because in the early days, the eastbound Century left Chicago while the markets were still open in New York. So the Central sent a clerk from Chicago to Elkhart, Indiana on the local train. By the time he got there, the markets were closed and he could transcribe the closing prices and then put them on the Century when it stopped at Elkhart. Then the clerk took the local home to Chicago. And that was his whole job.